The next presentation is going to be done by a group of excitable guys, ably led by Jason Barr, Executive for Safety and Security at NEC Exxon, and they're going to talk about security in these types of environments. As we all know, is inevitable, at some point in time, we will have to address the issue of security. Jason, can I hand over to you to introduce your team, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Johan, for the introduction. If you look at NEC's global focus is to create social values in safety, security, fairness, and efficiency to promote a more sustainable world. And if you look at the safety and security cluster for NEC Exxon, we're core to this focus. And if you look at the business, we made up of 3 business units within this cluster. If you look at our identity management business, which focuses on digital ID, national and centralized identification systems, biometrics, payment systems, and our kiosk over there, smart sales solutions or self-service solutions. If you look at our surveillance business, on the right there, we focus on surveillance, but at the next level using artificial intelligence, smart warehousing, and of course, NEC's leading global facial recognition product. And on the right here, we have the cybersecurity business, which is a fully integrated business, underpinned as a systems integrator, also underpinned by a 24/7 SOC. With the advent of 5G, where higher speeds and feeds are the norm, as a technologist, we're able to move the heavy lifting to the edge. And this creates efficiencies in deployments such as surveillance, IoT, and artificial intelligence to enable a smart and safe cities for the future. I think the sort of advent of 5G, it comes with its inherent issues. As we move to a more connected world, this raises, opens the door to more sophisticated cyber attacks. And I think the question on everyone's mind is, how do we protect our data, our citizens, and our assets, but still using technology to grow the economy? I have on the stage Kevin Smith, who heads up our cybersecurity business. I've got Alan Craig from our sponsor, Fortinet, and Johan Schoeman from NEC Exxon. Kevin.
Thanks, Jay. As introduced, Kevin Smith, also the guy that put up his hand to control the remote, and I see I already messed it up, so hopefully that was the last. But yeah, we are the security guys, and AKA the doctor knows. Over the last 2 years, business has come to us and said, guys, you need to look at business outcomes. We cannot continue to be doctor knows. So, you try and engage with business and try and work with them to get all of these business outcomes that you heard about this morning. So we've moved from being doctor knows to our standard answer now is yes, but, which is very similar to no, just different. Okay, but we are here today to discuss 5G and Open RAN. And as we heard from all of the speakers this morning, there's just way too much benefit that comes with some of these solutions and new revenue streams for us to continue to be doctor knows. We need to be in the front line with the rest of the business to enable some of these services, because we also know, I think it was Willem that spoke about being quick to market and going with that optimized view, especially in Africa. Those are going to be the guys that are going to win this race and that are going to get the most benefit out of it. So we're going to run this as a panel discussion. As as Jason introduced, we've got Johan, who heads up go-to-market consulting services for NEC, Exxon, cybersecurity and information security. And then we've got Alan Craig, not Alan, not Craig. He'll tell you a bit about that later in the bar. That's going to assist me with some of these questions. So just a bit of an analogy around security, guys, and just following on from the discussion that, or the introduction to what I've said around us being, the previous Dr. Knows, and now the guys that have realized we need to be in the front line with you guys to actually develop some of these solutions. I think the best analogy is, if you think about a car, what makes your car go faster? If we did have a poll going, 90% of you would have said the acceleration. It's actually the brake, right? Because that's what determines how safely and how fast you go. So you can go very fast, but you can crash very fast. So we do see ourselves as that pedal, and that's the role that we want to play with you guys. It's just to guide you around how to go forward with this. And with it being a new topic and a subject, I think there's a lot of discussions, a lot of ratification that's happening at the higher level, but we do have an idea of what the security considerations need to be. So just off to our first question, we're coming out of this era of 2G, 3G, and LTE/4G, moving into 5G. I'm going to ask Johan firstly, Johan, what are the considerations that needs to be given the threat landscape that now opens? What should we be considering?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So when we look at 5G and the changes that are happening in 5G, it does open some new challenges in cybersecurity around the implementation of the technologies, but we still have the historical and the legacy issues that will still come and flow into 5G. So one of them, for example, is a global shortage in cybersecurity skills that will flow back into the next era as well. But we see a lot of IoT and industrial IoT or IIoT technologies that are going to be emerging from this. There's going to be an influx of the way the compute is on the edge, and open APIs that will be exposed on this new 5G platforms. So historically, we look at it from a CIA triad perspective: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And each of these areas will still play an important role in 5G as opposed to LTE. Some of the things that we see that will be different is now that you're going to have your edge devices, virtualization platforms, and all of those new niche technologies in 5G, they're going to expose certain of these vulnerabilities that are out there. I know 5G has done a lot of, or the 5G is going to introduce some security components. You'll have abilities like slicing, but at the end of the day, when it comes to that, you need to also consider how you're going to approach your cybersecurity strategy. So an important aspect around this is the strategy for security in 5G. I'm going to pass on to Alan if he can give some comments.
I think that's the key thing, is strategy. I mean, the first context to security is understanding what one needs to secure. And I mean, as we can see here, I mean, there's two aspects of it. There's the physical security when, dealing with cell sites, and then there's the logical side of things. And actually validating equipment in the network is actually allowed to be and participate in the network itself. So looking at that, I mean, if we look at the operator landscape, specifically on the African continent, traditionally with 4G, the guys haven't really looked at security gateway. And that's actually securing the comms from site into the core itself. With 5G and Open RAN, I think that's going to be a hot topic on the cards in terms of securing that, because it's going to be a multi-tenanted environment. We've seen from some of the other vendors here that it's going to be very cloud heavy. Cloud heavy from a core perspective, cloud heavy from a MEC or MEC edge compute perspective. And that then flows into the separation of both public and private 5G deployments. Some of them, from what we see now, are going to be very enterprise-focused use cases. Now, Brian earlier alluded to the fact he was speaking very consumer-focused basis. The numbers we have seen is that 70% is going to be enterprise-focused. And for you as the telcos, it's something different. Never mind the protocol stack that you guys are going to be dealing with on a core basis, which is changing from your traditional SCTP diameter type protocols into more API-driven protocols. So it's a new way of looking at security. We still got to look at perimeters. So for securing from cell site into the core, we need to look at perimeters in terms of the edge going out on the GI LAN side, but more importantly, we need to look at the core itself. API gateways, there's a lot of TLS interaction there. It's something that you guys are not used to dealing with. And that's where you need to start looking at things like web application and API platforms, or traditionally as we call them WAFs, to do that protection, not only from a management layer, but from a control and signaling layer, as well as the inspection capability that you're going to need to look at from the user plane section.
Okay. So guys, we are going to move on to, if I get this right, I just want to move back before I ask the poll question. Please get your phones out. Just want to keep it a bit interactive, and I think hopefully it's going to work that we do have a live feed coming through in terms of the poll. But the question was based around a very well-known framework, which is the CIA Triad, which is what you see in front of you. I know that there are some guys and some school of thought out there that says, we should have, especially in the mining and manufacturing side of things, where safety is probably as important as revenue, safety should be included in there, and I know that it's something that's coming down the line. But the question so safety is not obviously part of the poll question, but just in terms of the question around the poll is, if we take the CIA Triad into consideration, as an organization, or just listening to kind of the first bit of feedback that we gave from you guys, or gave to you guys, what is your priority? And if there is somebody that safety is so high up the priority stack that you have to mention it, put up your hand, and I'll just do the count. Okay, so I don't see anything coming through, and I see a lot of activity on the floor. Okay. I'm just going to move on. Let's come back to it and see if we can update the live poll. So I think Jan did touch on our next question that we want to raise, and that's just around, we spoke about, I think it was once again Willem mentioned it earlier this morning, leading up to Open RAN. There's been 4 major players that have dominated this market, and what 5G Open RAN is doing is opening up that market to new players. We've seen some of the players on stage. So, that brings a lot of complexity, and if you think it's complex for you guys, it's even more complex for us guys that are trying to secure those environments, because the threat landscape just goes. And if we look at the expanding threat landscape, we look at things like moving intelligence and services to the edge, and we're looking at bringing OT and IoT, industrial IoT systems online into this architecture as well. And there's a lot of considerations that needs to be taken care of. So I'm just going to go through to Jan again and say, Jan, what are some of those considerations that we need to look at?
Yeah, so I'd like to use the analogy of the self-driving car. It's one of the buzzwords and the hypes in the industry these days that obviously comes about with moving into 5G or into the new technologies, into the new eras. So if you look at the principles behind that, at the end of the day, you can't put a server on a car. It weighs down the car and obviously makes it less cost-effective to maintain that vehicle. So what happens now is with the advent of 5G, it will introduce a distributed architecture for data centers or even with cloud, and a multi-cloud vendor or multi-vendor approach to organizations, where the AI intelligence and the processing capabilities for that vehicle will be in a cloud-based distributed data center environment with high-speed connectivity to the actual vehicle itself. Okay, which means that the compute of those are now on the edge of each of those sites there. So what happens in between? We need to look at how organizations are procuring their technologies to protect the environment or even supply that type of connectivity to a specific IoT or processing capability for a specific device or technology on the edge. Okay. Then we have the next one, which is to the cybersecurity considerations. There's going to be an open playing field for technologies in this space. Self-developed technologies, open platforms that are being provided, open APIs, API integrations with specific environments and communication mechanisms and things like that, which will introduce additional security threats in the landscape. So how does organizations prevent a technology or a device or an endpoint or an asset from being compromised and then moving laterally across the entire 5G space? And there's some strict considerations that need to be taken around that. We'll also take a look at some of them in further slides there. Okay. Annie?
Yeah, so I mean, as we can see here, I mean, we're talking about, again, in the cloud environment, very dynamic nature. Things need to scale according to the load, etc. In terms of the applications that are going to be hosted on the edge, those will be mobile-centric, where it's on the public side of things, where you as the operators are offering those services. So security is paramount there. But as we mentioned here, in terms of the OT or IIoT consideration here, when building out the private networks there, we already know that this environment for you alone, just from a networking perspective, is complex. Security is another layer of complexity onto that. Automation is going to be paramount in this environment in terms of following where the application flows are going, following where the network is going and where the demand is. You have to have the security follow suit with that. But what we're going to see here is that in those private network build-outs there, those enterprise customers are going to come to you looking for security solutions. And it's a market that you are not typically used to playing in. Now, from what I've seen with some of the providers, there are EBU or enterprise business units in said entities. Some of them don't have. But those are going to become the forefront in terms of driving that security solution out to the customer environment from the MEC, as well as what you guys are going to be focused with from a core-centric basis in terms of securing just the comms and the infrastructure that you guys are good at building out at.
Okay. I just want to go back to the poll and see if there's anything. Not yet. Okay.
So we can deduce that security is not a concern for you guys.
I'm sure it is. I did see a lot of activity. We spoke about, Alan mentioned some of the use cases that we will see coming out. We have already seen, and it's not a proof of concept or anything like that. We have seen in South Africa, the first one that I picked up is a live private 5G use case that went live, I think, 2 weeks ago in a mining environment. And there is a write-up on it. I think it was ITWeb that did that write-up. But we've got this other dynamic that we also need to look at, like private 5G, in contrast to normal 5G and obviously Open RAN, 5G Open RAN. It's something that our clients are already speaking to us about. And just back to you, Jan, what are the considerations? Is there any difference between the two? What should we consider there? What are the security considerations? And also, if we look at that very specific environments, like a mining environment that we're going to go into, now, how important is something like change control in those environments?
So, look, you need to take the advent of 5G as a holistic approach. With these complexities within an infrastructure, the simplicity behind using things like virtualization platforms and compute nodes and all of that, you introduce the ability for larger scale things like IoT denial of service attacks, IP cameras that are being breached and used as attack mechanisms. Then you've also got the advent of private 5G, where organizations think that they can, sort of segregate their network and protect themselves by using aspects like slicing. But if we look at that aspect, it's also, if you've compromised one environment, you can still find ways of traversing and moving through each of those various segments. So at the end of the day, the security is not necessarily on the edge. it has to be a zero trust type environment that you need to look at. So we need to adopt a zero trust mindset for the edge devices, protecting the assets, protecting the endpoints. But at the same time, as a holistic approach for an organization such as a ISP or an integrator that is providing solutions for these organizations, enterprise organizations, you need to look at it from an end-to-end perspective. Now, being an integrator, which we've seen earlier, there's nice aspects that we've put together. We've put these things into play. We've built the 5G in the lab. But bringing private 5G into organizations such as mining, you still have the procurement considerations to take into consideration. You still have the core, the network, the access security, the LAN security, the communication into cloud environments, and the security that pertains around those aspects there. So it's a very strategic approach that you need to take when you look at 5G and 5G security that will be required in the future. And again, looking at it from a framework perspective, building yourself out and using an end-to-end approach with a zero trust mindset, bringing all of this together and then working at a central location to be able to provide that security component to an organization.
Yeah, we're almost out of time, but I'm going to give Alan an opportunity just to wrap up.
So I love this diagram because to me it's the same that we've been used to, but different. You guys have been looking at things like CGNAT, looking at service complexes post the CGNAT on the GR LAN side, where you're going to provide certain security chaining functions, etc. The core thing here to think about is that when we look at it in the context, again, of public and private, the public side is you. That is what you have control of, and that's typically not a high-touch environment. It's pretty static in the sense that you control and understand and build out according to what you're planning. When we look at it from a private perspective there, it's a very niche use case to said entity. So that could be, in this case, like you mentioned, mining. It could be retail. They'll have a different approach and different set of requirements from a networking perspective, but at the same time, from a security perspective, their requirements would differ. Now, in the Fortinet speaking, we talk about our security fabric, that if you have implemented the certain security functions within our product portfolio here, to you, nothing will change. Nothing will change from a skill set perspective because the fabric integrates everything. So the same set of security skills that you've been using and deploying for these solutions, you can then expand out into those customer environments. The only difference is that, just remember, on the customer side, it's a high-touch environment because things are going to change at a lot more rapid pace. We spoke about change control now, you mentioned that. Here, very stringent change control. The same cannot necessarily be applied to the customer. They may have their own type of change control at play, or they're going to be a very dynamic a type of client where things need to move much faster. You cannot sit and wait for a week or end or a month end to actually deploy these changes. So just think of that in terms of a security context, that you need to secure the edge. You need to have a look at the customers that are going to approach you for a security solution, not just from the 5G private network that they're looking for you to provide as infrastructure providers. They're going to come and ask you again also for the security aspect to that. And that's where your EBUs, it's their time to shine, is actually providing that security architecture for those customers.
Okay. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure spending some time with you. Like the networking guys, we're on a journey with Open RAN 5G. We do have all the building blocks which you see, and we present to you guys as the market as our CDOC. We'd like to chat to you a bit more. We're going to be here the rest of the day. There's some guys sitting at the back from our team, so please engage with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2 minutes over.
Thank you, gentlemen. Security is always a tough topic, but I think you guys certainly demonstrated deep knowledge, around cybersecurity in the 5G Open RAN space.